She put flowers on a stranger's grave, then learned whose it was. Emma didn't plan to stop. She had placed the bouquet on her grandmother's grave like she always did, said a few quiet words, and started back toward her car when something caught her eye. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. It was a small headstone near the edge of the row. No decorations, no flowers. The grass around it looked recently trimmed, but untouched otherwise. The name carved into the stone was Margaret Ann Palmer, born 1932, died 2004. No epitaph, no quote, just the bare facts. Emma stopped in front of it without knowing why. She glanced down at the extra flower in her hand, a single pink carnation from the bunch. She had brought a few extras, just in case her grandmother's vase needed filling. Without thinking, she knelt down and laid the carnation gently at the base of Margaret's stone. Not out of obligation, not out of any particular reason. Just something about it felt unfinished, and this made it feel less so. She stood up, dusted her hands off, and walked back to her car. She didn't tell anyone about it. Didn't even remember it until 2 weeks later, when she visited again. After placing flowers on her grandmother's grave, her eyes drifted back to Margaret's marker. Still quiet. Still bare. This time, she had brought a few wildflowers. She laid 2 of them down beside the stone and stayed there a little longer. It became a habit. Once a month, when she came to the cemetery, she left something small at Margaret's grave. Sometimes flowers. Once a tiny pine cone she picked up on a walk. Another time, a little note that simply read, "You were not forgotten today." She didn't know who Margaret was. She didn't know what kind of life she had lived. But every time she walked past that marker, something in her felt a tug. Like maybe Margaret had once mattered to someone, and that someone hadn't come back in a while. She didn't talk about it. It wasn't a story she felt like explaining. It was just something she did now. By the 3rd month, she found herself wondering about Margaret even outside of the cemetery, wondering what kind of life she lived, if she had children, if she liked music, if she had been loved well, if she had laughed easily or rarely, if she had friends who remembered her birthday. One Saturday afternoon, Emma stopped by the cemetery office and asked if they had any information. The woman behind the desk pulled up a thin file. A few yellowed pages. Burial date. Plot number. Paid in full by Margaret herself years before she passed. No mention of family. No visitors listed. Emma thanked the woman and stepped outside with more questions than answers. She walked back to the grave and stood there longer than usual. It was strange how someone she had never met could feel so present. The next week, she brought a small photo frame. Empty. Just a frame with a simple black border. She placed it gently against the headstone and whispered, "For whatever belonged here." Then she sat on the bench nearby and stayed until the sun slipped lower. She didn't know what she was doing, but she knew she'd be back. Emma kept thinking about the name, Margaret Ann Palmer. It followed her around in small ways. When she passed the flower stand at the grocery store, when she flipped through old photo albums at her mother's house, when she walked by the community bulletin board at the library and paused a little longer, scanning names she didn't recognize. She didn't know what she was looking for, just that something inside her felt unfinished. The next time she visited the cemetery, it had been raining the night before. The ground was soft under her shoes. The carnations she'd left on her grandmother's grave had started to wilt, their edges curled inward. She replaced them with fresh daisies and walked the now familiar path to Margaret's grave. The empty frame she'd left was still there, slightly tilted from the wind. A leaf had blown into the corner of it. She brushed it away and sat on the nearby bench. The stone looked the same, quiet, steady. But as she leaned closer, she noticed something different this time. There was a folded piece of paper resting at the base of the headstone. It was damp at the corners, pressed down by a small rock. Someone had placed it there intentionally. Emma looked around. The cemetery was still. No cars, no other visitors. She hesitated, then picked it up. The paper was worn from the weather but still legible. It read, "She was kinder to me than anyone else ever was. I never forgot her. No signature, no date." Emma read it 3 times, then sat with it in her lap, unsure what to feel. Someone else had come. Someone who knew her. Not a family member maybe, but someone who remembered. That changed something. She placed the note carefully in her coat pocket and sat back down. The wind moved softly through the trees above her. She stayed longer than usual. That night, she placed the note on her kitchen counter and stared at it while she made tea. The handwriting was small and careful, as if the person had taken time to choose each word. Emma opened her laptop. She typed Margaret Palmer into the search bar. Pages of unrelated names came up. News stories, obituaries, local directories. Nothing clear. She tried narrowing the search, added the year, added the town. Still not much. Eventually, a brief mention surfaced in an old school newsletter archived on a local history site. A retirement announcement from 1992. Margaret Palmer, elementary school teacher, 37 years of service. No photo, just her name and the date of her retirement celebration. Emma clicked on it anyway. The mention was short. She printed it out. She had something now. A piece. Not much, but it was enough to keep going. She visited the library the next day, asked the reference desk for help accessing old local newspapers, sat at a microfilm reader for 2 hours, found one article from the early 70s about a teacher at Meadow Lane Elementary who had organized a coat drive for students in need. The teacher's name was Margaret Palmer. The article didn't say much else, but it was something. Emma printed it. She walked home with both pages in her bag. One short article, one retirement notice, both fragile in their own ways, but real. That evening she placed both beside the note. Then she added a 4th item, a small card. She wrote on it, "You were remembered today, and now someone else is learning who you were. Thank you for the kindness you gave. It's still reaching people." She planned to bring it next time, not because Margaret would read it, but because someone should say it out loud. The next visit felt different before Emma even got out of the car. She had the card tucked into the front pocket of her bag, along with the 2 articles she'd printed. The original note, "She was kinder to me than anyone else ever was still in her coat pocket. She didn't know what she was going to do with it. She just knew she wanted to bring it with her. The sky was overcast. No rain, but the kind of day where everything felt muted. She walked the path slowly, familiar now, nodding gently as she passed her grandmother's grave. She didn't stop. Not yet. Margaret's grave came into view like it always did. Simple. Still. The frame she had left leaned slightly, but hadn't fallen. The stone was clear of debris, except for one small leaf stuck at the base. She knelt down and brushed it aside. And then she saw it. Another note, folded carefully, tucked just behind the corner of the stone, held down by a smooth, flat pebble. She reached for it, heart already picking up speed. The paper was lined, torn from a notebook, slightly worn around the edges but dry, no damage from the weather. She opened it slowly. She saw me, when no one else did. Her voice was soft, but her presence changed my life. It was only 1 year, but it stayed with me. Thank you for remembering her. Still no name. Still no date. Emma sat back on the bench, the note in her hand. She read it again, then again. That was 2 people now. 2 strangers who had been quietly returning here, leaving pieces of someone they once knew. Someone Emma had never met. Someone she had stumbled upon by accident. Only it didn't feel like an accident anymore. She took the card she had written and placed it gently beside the headstone, anchoring it with a small rock. The handwriting faced up. It wasn't meant to last forever, just long enough to be read by the next person who came. If they came. She pulled the first note from her coat pocket and unfolded it, placing it beside the second one in her lap. Then she added the 2 printouts. All 4 items sat there, lined up across her knees. They didn't form a full story, but they were beginning to speak. Emma looked around the cemetery, still quiet, still no one in sight. She picked up the second note and reread the line. Her presence changed my life. It sounded simple, but she felt the weight of it. That evening, she stopped by the same library, asked the same woman at the desk for help. This time, she focused only on Meadow Lane Elementary. Teacher records, yearbooks, retirement announcements. She found an old scanned image of a school photo from 1988. And there she was, Margaret Palmer, front row, second from the left, gray cardigan, soft smile, the kind of expression that didn't ask for attention but still managed to hold it. Emma stared at the picture longer than she meant to, printed it, tucked it carefully into her bag. She didn't know what she was going to do with all of it, but she knew now that this story wasn't over. Not yet. She wasn't just putting flowers on a forgotten grave anymore. She was remembering someone, and somehow, in the quiet way that mattered most, others were remembering her too. Emma placed the printed school photo beside Margaret's headstone the following weekend. She laminated it first, not perfectly, but enough to keep the rain from ruining it. She slid it inside the frame she'd left weeks earlier, replacing the empty space with something real, something with a face. She didn't write anything on it, just let the image speak for itself. Margaret had kind eyes. That was the first thing Emma noticed. A calm expression, gentle but focused, like someone who had learned how to listen. She didn't smile wide, but the corners of her mouth lifted just enough to show she was present, a quiet kind of strength. Emma stepped back from the grave and looked down at the new arrangement. 2 handwritten notes tucked beneath small stones, a card she had written, and now a photo. The grave didn't look lonely anymore. She sat on the bench and pulled out her notebook. For the first time, she started writing things down. She made a list. Margaret Ann Palmer, born 1932, died 2004, retired schoolteacher. 37 years at Meadow Lane. Organized a coat drive. Mentioned in 2 notes from strangers. Described as kind. Described as someone who saw people. It wasn't a biography, not yet, but it was something. She tore the page out and folded it into her coat pocket. That night, she searched online again, this time using the school's name and the year Margaret retired. She found an old community newsletter archived as a PDF. Inside was a short write-up on the retirement of 3 faculty members. Margaret Palmer was one of them. The article mentioned a quote from a speech she gave at her retirement luncheon. Emma read it 3 times. I didn't always know what to say, but I always tried to notice the ones who were quiet, the ones who weren't asking for help but needed someone anyway. That line stayed with her all night. The next morning, Emma printed the article and added it to a folder she had started keeping. She titled it simply, Margaret Palmer. Later that week, she went back to the cemetery. Not to leave anything this time, just to check. And someone else had come. There were 3 wildflowers, clumsily tied together with a rubber band, laid neatly at the base of the headstone. A small, folded note rested beside them. Emma didn't open this one. She didn't need to. The message was already clear. Other people remembered her. People whose lives she had touched in ways she likely never knew. Emma sat on the bench, folded her hands in her lap, and stared at the scene for a long time. She wondered how many students Margaret had taught, how many kids she had noticed without making it a big deal, how many moments of quiet kindness had followed someone into adulthood without her ever knowing. Emma thought about her own life, her own teachers, the ones who paid attention when she hadn't asked them to. She pulled out her notebook and wrote another line. Maybe the ones who are remembered quietly are the ones who mattered the most. She didn't know what else she was supposed to do. She didn't have a plan, but she knew she wasn't finished. Margaret's life had started to grow roots in her own, not in the loud way, but in the kind that lasts. The bench near Margaret's grave was wet from the morning dew, so Emma stood instead. She had brought a thermos of coffee this time, and a folded paper towel to dry the bench just in case. But something about standing felt better today. She hadn't expected to see anyone else this early, but as she rounded the corner of the row, she saw a man sitting there already. He looked to be in his 70s, a weathered coat, gray stubble, and hands folded in front of him like he'd been waiting without knowing it. He didn't look up when she approached. Emma hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but this wasn't just her place anymore. She stepped a little closer. "Hi," she said quietly. The man glanced up. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "You've been bringing the flowers," he said. Emma nodded. "I hope that's okay." He looked back at the headstone. "More than okay." There was a pause. "I didn't know if anyone else ever came," she said. He shook his head slowly. "I didn't come for a long time. I should have. But I didn't know what to say." Emma didn't sit. She just stood nearby, letting the quiet settle between them. "She was your teacher?" she asked gently. He gave a small nod. "Yes. A long time ago." They stayed silent for a moment longer. Then he said, "I was failing everything. My dad had left. My mom worked nights. I came to school tired and angry and hungry. Most teachers gave up on me." Emma listened. She didn't. She never said much, just started keeping me after class, let me eat lunch in her room, gave me a book once. "You don't have to finish it," she told me. "Just carry it around for a while." He smiled a little. I carried that book in my bag for the rest of the year. Emma looked down at the headstone. "She saw you." He nodded, and never made a big deal out of it. "What was the book?" she asked. He looked up at her. Didn't matter. What mattered was that she gave it to me like I was worth something. Emma finally sat. She pulled her coffee thermos from her bag and poured a little into the cap. "She made you feel noticed," she said. "She did more than that," he replied. "She changed the course." They sat in stillness again, the wind rustling gently through the trees. A bird called out nearby, sharp and short. The man didn't flinch. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "I left notes, just short ones. I didn't sign them." Emma smiled. "I read them." He chuckled softly. "I figured." She pulled out the folder she had started, opened it carefully, showed him the retirement article, the quote, the school photo. "She mattered to more people than she probably ever knew," Emma said. He studied the photo for a long moment. "She never needed a spotlight, but maybe she deserves one now." Emma closed the folder and placed it in her lap. "I think so too." He stood slowly, knees stiff, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. It was a bookmark, laminated, faded print on one side, a handwritten note on the back. He handed it to her. She gave me this, wrote it herself. Emma read the handwriting. You are not invisible. She looked up at him. I think we should share her story, she said. He nodded once. Let's do that. And then he walked away. Not hurried, just steady. Emma stayed on the bench long after the man left. The bookmark rested in her hands, the handwriting staring back at her like it was meant for more than just him. You are not invisible. She kept rereading the words, the simplicity of them, the weight. She thought about how many kids had probably walked through Margaret Palmer's classroom doors, not knowing what they needed, and how she must have noticed anyway. It made Emma feel like the little things mattered more than people admitted. A lunch offered, a quiet space, a sentence written on a bookmark. She tucked it carefully inside the folder and looked over at the headstone. The photo in the frame still held its place. A few new flowers had joined the arrangement at the base. Someone had left a small pebble painted with a tiny heart. She didn't know who. That didn't matter. She pulled out her notebook, turned to a fresh page, and began writing without hesitation. Margaret Palmer taught at Meadow Lane Elementary for 37 years. She wasn't famous. There are no plaques with her name, no foundation, no scholarship fund. But she left a mark. Not one you see all at once, the kind that shows up slowly, in stories, in memories, in the way people remember how she made them feel. Emma stopped writing, looked out across the cemetery. She had been trying to figure out what she owed this stranger, why she kept coming back. But maybe it wasn't about owing anything. Maybe it was about carrying something forward. That evening, she emailed the local historical society, told them she'd been researching a former teacher, and asked if they'd be willing to help preserve a story. A woman named Cheryl replied the next day, said she'd be glad to meet. They sat down 2 days later at a small table in the back of the library. Emma brought the folder, laid out everything. The school photo, the printed articles, copies of the 2 notes from the grave, the bookmark. Cheryl listened carefully, didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly as Emma explained how it started with a single flower left on a headstone she didn't recognize. When Emma finished, Cheryl leaned back and said, "This is exactly the kind of story we want to preserve. It's quiet, but it's real." They talked for an hour. Cheryl offered to scan the materials, suggested doing a short write-up for the town's historical blog, maybe even a display at the library for Teacher Appreciation Week. Emma didn't expect any of that. She just wanted someone else to know. That night she wrote a new card. To whoever visits her next, she was the kind of person who saw what others overlooked. She made quiet things feel important. She didn't need to be known to matter. But now she is. She brought it to the cemetery the following morning, placed it gently beneath the photo frame. She stood for a moment, her hands in her jacket pockets, and whispered, "It's working." Then she sat on the bench and watched the sun move behind the clouds. She didn't need answers anymore, just to keep remembering. Because sometimes the best way to honor someone isn't with big gestures, but by making sure their kindness doesn't stop with them. Emma returned the next week with a copy of the printed blog post in her bag. Cheryl from the Historical Society had published it just 2 days earlier. A simple piece titled, "The Teacher Who Quietly Changed Lives, Remembering Margaret Palmer." It included the photo Emma had found, the retirement quote, and one of the anonymous notes. Cheryl had asked permission to use the line from the bookmark too. "You are not invisible." The post had already been shared a few times online. Not viral, not loud, but enough. Emma brought a laminated copy and placed it gently beside the frame at the grave. She stepped back to look, The site had changed over the past few weeks. There were more flowers now. A small candle in a jar. A smooth stone with the word "Thank You" painted across it. The kind of memorial that builds slowly, piece by piece, from people who never needed a reason beyond feeling something. She sat on the bench with her coffee and pulled out her notebook. No writing today. Just watching. After a few minutes, someone approached. Emma turned. It was a woman in her 50s. Brown jacket, hands in her pockets, eyes a little red. She gave a small nod in Emma's direction before walking to the headstone. She placed a single yellow tulip at the base, knelt briefly, and then stood. "You knew her?" the woman asked, her voice quiet. Emma shook her head. "Not really. I found the grave by accident a few months ago, started leaving flowers. Then I started learning." The woman smiled gently. "I was in her class in 3rd grade. I hadn't been back here in years." Emma stood now, feeling the moment settle between them. "She was the first adult who ever told me I was smart," the woman said. "I didn't believe it then, but I remember it. Still." Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a copy of the article. "We're collecting pieces of her story, for the library, for people to read and remember." The woman took it slowly. She wouldn't have wanted attention. "No," Emma said, "but I think she'd be glad it helped someone." The woman nodded. "She helped more people than she ever knew." They stood in silence for a few more moments. The woman turned to go, then paused. "Thank you for doing this," she said, "for remembering someone you never met." Emma watched her walk away. She turned back to the grave, reached down, and adjusted the laminated article, making sure it wouldn't slide. Then she noticed something new. Another note, tucked beneath the flowers. She unfolded it. "She taught me how to tie my shoes, and how to feel safe in a room full of people. I'm 40 now. I still remember her voice." Emma blinked slowly, letting the words sink in. The more she read, the more she realized Margaret Palmer had never been forgotten. Just unspoken. And now, one small act had given all of them permission to remember out loud. Emma placed the note beside the others, then sat back down and wrote only one sentence in her notebook. She made people feel seen. Now they're seeing her too. The next Saturday, Emma came early. The grass was still damp and cool under her shoes. She brought a cloth from home and wiped the bench before sitting down. The grave was quiet, as usual, but it didn't feel forgotten anymore. It felt visited, watched over. She brought a new frame with her this time. Inside was a photo of the front of Meadow Lane Elementary. She'd taken it earlier that week. The school looked different now, renovated, but still standing, still full of classrooms, still full of kids. She placed the photo next to the others and stepped back. More items had appeared since her last visit. A small crocheted heart, a ribbon tied to a flower stem, another note, sealed in a plastic sleeve to protect it from the rain. Emma read it slowly. "I was a teacher because of her. She said I had a calm way of helping others. I've carried that sentence with me for 30 years. Thank you for reminding me where it started." She folded the note gently and set it back where it had been. She didn't know who was writing them. Didn't need to. But she'd started collecting copies of each one. A second folder now sat in her apartment, labeled Margaret Palmer, Messages Left Behind. It was quiet work. No ceremony, no speeches, just keeping track of what mattered. That morning she wasn't alone for long. Thomas arrived just before 10, walking with his usual slow, steady steps. He nodded to Emma and sat beside her. He handed her a paper bag. "I brought muffins," he said. My wife used to say you should never visit anyone empty-handed. Emma smiled and took one. Thank you. They sat for a while, not talking, just watching the sun stretch slowly across the grass. Eventually, Thomas said, You know, she would have never asked for this. I know, Emma said, but I think she would have liked it. I think so too. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photograph. This one was different. Faded, folded twice. It showed a classroom, chalkboard, desks, a few students blurry in the background. And Margaret, seated at her desk, half turned toward the camera. Not posing, just caught in the moment. Her mouth mid-sentence. Her eyes steady. I took this, he said. Last week of school, senior year. I snuck it with a disposable camera. Never showed it to anyone. Until now. Emma held it carefully. She looks like she knew, she said. Thomas nodded. She always did. Emma placed the photo in the new frame she'd brought, gently replacing the school building with Margaret's image. She stood it up on the ground near the stone. Now, her face looked out toward the bench. Thomas placed one hand on the back of the bench and leaned forward slightly. I think this is the first time I've said her name out loud in years, he said. Feels good, doesn't it? He nodded again. Better than I expected. They didn't say much after that, just shared the muffins, sipped coffee from matching thermoses, and sat beside the woman who had once helped them feel seen. As they left, Emma paused by the headstone one last time. She whispered quietly, You're still teaching people, and then walked away, already planning what she'd bring next week. The sky was clear the following Saturday, the kind of bright blue that made the headstones cast sharp shadows across the grass. Emma parked in her usual spot and carried two things in her bag, a new bouquet of white daisies and a printed binder, thick with letters and photos. When she reached Margaret's grave, she stopped short. There were already people there. 3 of them. 2 women, 1 man. They stood close together, quietly talking, one of the women holding a single sunflower. Emma approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt. One of the women turned and smiled. Are you Emma? She nodded, unsure how they knew. The woman stepped forward. I'm Carla. This is my brother Dean, and our cousin Meredith. Margaret was our aunt. Emma blinked. You knew her? We didn't know she was buried here, Carla said. Not until someone sent us the article your library posted online. A woman named Cheryl emailed me, said you'd been leaving flowers, that you were gathering stories. Emma smiled. I didn't know anyone would come. I wasn't sure if she had family. She didn't have children, Carla said, but she was our favorite. We called her Aunt Margie. She sent us books every Christmas. Dean added, She was the first person who made me feel like being quiet wasn't a flaw. Emma felt a warmth build behind her eyes. She mattered so much to people, Emma said. I didn't even know her. I just found the grave one day and I couldn't stop coming back. Carla reached out and placed a hand gently on Emma's shoulder. She would have loved you for that. Emma opened her bag and pulled out the binder. She handed it to them. These are the notes, the stories, the photos, everything I found or that people left. They sat on the bench together and turned through the pages slowly. At one point, Meredith paused and whispered, She really wasn't forgotten. Emma shook her head. Not even close. They stayed for nearly an hour, reading, talking, sharing pieces of Margaret none of them had expected to hold again. Before they left, Dean pulled a small plaque from his backpack. It was simple. Bronze. The kind you'd find on a park bench or outside a library. It read, In memory of Margaret Palmer, a quiet teacher who made people feel seen. You are not invisible. "We were thinking," he said, "maybe we could place this here, near the stone, if that's all right with you." Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Later that day she sat on the bench alone, the plaque now resting in the grass, waiting for its permanent place. A little girl and her father walked by, hand in hand. The girl paused to look at the framed photo of Margaret, then turned to her dad. "Who is that?" she asked. Emma smiled. "She was a teacher," she said. "A really good one." The girl nodded and kept walking. Emma leaned back on the bench, watching the wind ripple through the trees. More flowers now, more notes tucked in sleeves. The story wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to all of them. And Margaret, quiet, kind, unnoticed for far too long, had become something she never asked for. Remembered, not with ceremony, but with care. With thank you notes left on stone, with strangers who returned, with one flower left by someone who didn't know why at the time. Emma folded her hands in her lap. She didn't need to write anything new today. The story had already told itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.